They told her she was lucky they let her keep her own last name. When Sarah packed her bags and walked out of the Sterling estate, she had nothing but the clothes on her back and a broken heart. Her ex-husband was already moving his mistress into the master bedroom, and his mother was laughing as the gate closed. They thought they had won. They thought the divorce decree was the end of the story. But they forgot one thing. The old man, Arthur Sterling, had been watching everything, and when his will was finally read, the laughter stopped forever. This is the story of the most satisfying revenge in history. The silence in the dining room of the Sterling estate was usually heavy, but tonight it felt like a physical weight pressing against Sarah's chest. The crystal chandelier above the table didn't sparkle. It glared. Sarah looked across the long mahogany table at her husband, Richard. Rick to his friends, Richard to his mother, and lately, a stranger to Sarah. He was picking at his filet mignon, his eyes glued to his phone. At the head of the table sat Beatrice Sterling, a woman whose heart was as cold as the pearls strangling her neck. "Sarah," Beatrice said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Stop clinking your fork. It's pedestrian." "Sorry, Beatrice," Sarah murmured, placing the silver utensil down. She had lived in this house in Greenwich, Connecticut, for 7 years, yet she still felt like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. "Mother, leave her alone," Rick said, though he didn't look up from his screen. It was a half-hearted defense, the kind he offered just to keep the noise down, not because he cared. "I'm simply trying to help her, Richard," Beatrice sniffed, taking a sip of her Pinot Noir. "If she is to represent this family at the charity gala next week, she needs to stop eating like a field hand." Sarah felt the familiar sting of tears, but swallowed them back. She was 32, a college graduate with a degree in art history. But in this house, she was just the waitress Rick had picked up at a diner during his rebellious phase. That's what Beatrice called it. The rebellious phase. "I actually wanted to talk about the gala," Sarah said, trying to steady her voice. "I was thinking, since Arthur liked the local animal shelter so much, maybe we could divert some of the auction proceeds to—" "My husband," Beatrice interrupted, slamming her glass down, "has been dead for 6 months. What he liked is irrelevant. What matters is the Sterling legacy. And puppies don't build legacies, Sarah. Infrastructure does." Rick finally set his phone down. He looked tired, or maybe just bored. He looked at Sarah, and for a second she saw a flash of pity in his eyes. It terrified her more than Beatrice's cruelty. "We need to talk," Rick said. The 3 words every wife dreads. But in the Sterling house, dread was just part of the decor. "Can it wait until after dessert?" Sarah asked, her stomach churning. "Cook made that tart I like." "No," Rick said. He stood up, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "Mother, you might want to stay for this." Beatrice's eyes lit up. She knew. She had known before Sarah did. Rick walked over to the sideboard and pulled out a large manila envelope. He tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of Sarah's plate. "What is this?" Sarah asked, her hands trembling as she reached for it. "Divorce papers," Rick said flatly. The room spun. Sarah gripped the edge of the table. "Divorce? Rick, we just came back from Cabo. You said you were happy. We were trying for a baby." "I was trying to keep you quiet," Rick sighed, leaning against the sideboard. "Look, Sarah, it's over. It's been over. I've met someone." "Someone?" Sarah whispered. "Tiffany," Beatrice interjected, a smug smile spreading across her face. "Tiffany Sinclair, the senator's daughter. A lovely girl. Cultured." Sarah looked from Beatrice to Rick. "You told your mother before you told me." "Mother helped me with logistics," Rick admitted, avoiding her gaze. "Tiffany and I, we just connect, Sarah. She understands my world. You've tried, I'll give you that. But you're just not one of us," Beatrice finished. "Never were. Never will be." Sarah opened the envelope. The legal jargon swam before her eyes, but certain numbers jumped out. 0. There's no settlement, Sarah said, looking up, confused. Rick, the prenup said you get a payout if we remain married for 10 years, Rick said. It's been 7. You get nothing. Just what you came in with. Which, Beatrice chuckled, was a Honda Civic and a bag of cheap polyester clothes. I helped you build your firm, Sarah said, her voice rising, finally finding a spark of anger. I organized every event. I managed the renovation of this house. I nursed your father, Arthur, when he was dying of cancer while you two were off in the Hamptons. You were doing your duty, Beatrice dismissed, and Arthur was senile at the end. He didn't know who was wiping his chin. He knew, Sarah said, tears finally spilling over. He was the only one in this family who treated me like a human being. Well, he's gone, Rick said coldly. And you need to be gone, too. Tonight. Tonight? Sarah gasped. It's 10 o'clock. Where am I supposed to go? I booked you a room at the Motel 6 off I-95, Rick said, checking his watch. Paid for 3 nights. After that, you're on your own. You can't do this, Sarah pleaded. Rick, please, let's go to counseling. Let's talk about this alone. Rick walked over to her. For a moment, she thought he would hug her. Instead, he reached out and gently unclasped the diamond necklace from her neck, the one he'd given her for their 5th anniversary. Family heirloom, he muttered, pocketing it. Tiffany will want it reset. That was the breaking point. The sheer callousness of it snapped something inside Sarah. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You are a coward, Richard Sterling, she spat. And you, she pointed a shaking finger at Beatrice, you are a bitter, lonely old witch. Beatrice didn't flinch. She just pressed a button under the table. Wilson, please escort Miss Miller out. She's trespassing. Miss Miller, her maiden name. They had already stripped her of her identity. Wilson, the family security guard who had once helped Sarah change a flat tire in the rain, walked in. He looked down at the floor, ashamed. Ma'am, Wilson said softly, I'm sorry. I have orders. It's okay, Wilson, Sarah said, wiping her face. I'm leaving. She ran upstairs to the master bedroom, the room she had decorated in soft blues and creams, trying to make this mausoleum of a house feel like a home. She grabbed 2 suitcases and threw in whatever she could grab. Jeans, sweaters, her sketchbook. She left the gowns. She left the jewelry. She left the life she had tried so hard to fit into. As she dragged her bags down the grand staircase, Rick and Beatrice were standing in the foyer. Beatrice was holding a glass of champagne. Don't forget your car, Rick called out. It's parked in the driveway. The Jag stays in the garage. I don't want your damn Jaguar, Sarah said. She reached the door and turned back one last time. You think you have everything because you have money. But you have nothing. You have no loyalty, no love, and no soul. Arthur was right about you. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. What did Arthur say? He said you were wolves, Sarah said, her voice steady now, and that wolves eventually eat each other. She slammed the heavy oak door behind her. Outside, the October air was biting. The wind whipped her hair across her face as she dragged her suitcases down the long, paved driveway to where her old Honda Civic sat. It had been sitting under a tarp for years, dusty and neglected. She threw her bags in the back, prayed the engine would start, and turned the key. It sputtered, coughed, but finally roared to life. As she drove through the iron gates of the Sterling estate, she saw the lights of the house blazing behind her. She imagined Tiffany moving in tomorrow. She imagined Beatrice gloating. She had $400 in her personal checking account. She had no job, no apartment, and her family in Ohio was dead. She was alone. But as she merged onto the highway, blinded by tears, she remembered the last conversation she had with Arthur Sterling 3 days before he died. He had gripped her hand with surprising strength, his breathing ragged. Sarah, he had wheezed, they don't see you, but I do. When the time comes, Trust Mr. Henderson. Trust the red binder. She had thought it was the morphine talking. She had forgotten all about it until now. Mr. Henderson, Arthur's personal attorney. Not the family lawyer, Arthur's private attorney. Sarah wiped her eyes. She wasn't going to the Motel 6. She checked the time. It was late, but she knew where Mr. Henderson lived. He had been the only other person at Arthur's bedside besides her. She signaled right, taking the exit toward downtown Greenwich. She wasn't trash, and she wasn't done fighting. The rain began to fall just as Sarah pulled up to the curb of a modest, ivy-covered brownstone in the historic district of Greenwich. It was a stark contrast to the sprawling, cold, manicured lawns of the Sterling estate. This was the home of James Henderson, a man who had been Arthur Sterling's shadow for 40 years, and a man Beatrice Sterling frequently referred to as that dusty old beetle. Sarah killed the engine. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely unbuckle her seatbelt. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her. She had no home, she had no husband. She was a 32-year-old divorcee with a trunk full of sweaters and a heart full of broken glass. She stepped out into the rain, not bothering with an umbrella, and ran up the steps. She pounded on the heavy wooden door. Please be home. Please be awake. It was nearly 11 p.m. The porch light flickered on, and the door creaked open. James Henderson stood there, wrapped in a maroon velvet robe, his spectacles perched precariously on the end of his nose. He looked older than Sarah remembered, his hair thinning and white, but his eyes behind the thick lenses were sharp as tacks. "Sarah?" He squinted, peering into the gloom. He saw the tear-streaked mascara, the soaked blouse, and the desperate posture. He didn't ask a single question. He simply stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in, child, quickly, before you catch your death." Inside, the house smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and lemon polish. It was warm. It was safe. Sarah collapsed onto the tufted leather sofa in the library, and for the first time since leaving the estate, she let out a sob that sounded more like a wounded animal than a human being. James disappeared and returned moments later with a heavy wool blanket and a crystal tumbler filled with amber liquid. "Brandy," he said, handing it to her. "Arthur's favorite blend." "Drink." Sarah took a sip. It burned, but the heat spread through her chest, grounding her. James sat in the wingback chair opposite her, steepling his fingers. "So," he said softly, "they finally did it. The wolves turned on the shepherd." Sarah looked up, wiping her eyes. "Rick, he served me papers. Tonight, at the dinner table. He's with someone else. Tiffany Sinclair." James let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "The senator's girl, of course. Beatrice has been orchestrating that merger since Tiffany was in braces. It's not a romance, Sarah. It's a business acquisition." "They kicked me out," Sarah whispered. "They gave me nothing. The prenup allows them to strip you of assets if the marriage dissolves before 10 years, James recited from memory. Standard Sterling cruelty. Beatrice wrote that clause herself. Arthur hated it. "Arthur," Sarah said, the name causing a fresh wave of pain. "He told me, right before the end. He said if this happened, I should come to you. He mentioned a red binder." James's expression shifted. The sympathy in his eyes hardened into something steely and professional. He stood up and walked to the large oil painting of a seascape on the wall. He reached behind the frame and pulled a hidden lever. The painting swung outward, revealing a wall safe. "Arthur knew his son was weak," James said, his back to her as he spun the dial. "And he knew his wife was a tyrant. He loved them in his own complicated way. But he saw the rot at the core of the family. He knew that as long as you were there, you were the moral compass. But he also predicted that once he was gone, Beatrice would excise you like a tumor to protect the purity of the bloodline." The safe clicked open. James reached in and pulled out a thick, leather-bound binder. It was a deep blood red. He placed it on the coffee table between them. It landed with a heavy thud. "This," James said, "is the Sterling contingency." Sarah reached out to touch it. "What is it? A new will?" "Not exactly," James said. "The will that was probated 6 months ago, the one that gave Beatrice control of the estate and Rick the CEO position, was legitimate. Arthur signed it." Sarah's heart sank. "So, I really have nothing?" "Wait," James held up a finger. "Arthur signed that will 5 years ago. But Arthur was a man who believed in insurance. He created a dead man's switch. This binder contains a codicil, a legal modification to the will, and an immense amount of private documentation." James leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The codicil has a trigger clause. It states that the primary distribution of the Sterling Trust is conditional. If Richard Sterling divorces Sarah Miller within 5 years of Arthur's death, the assets are frozen immediately pending a moral audit." "A moral audit?" Sarah asked, confused. "It's an archaic term Arthur loved," James smiled grimly. "Essentially, it means the entire estate distribution is paused, and a new reading of the final will takes place, a reading that considers the behavior of the beneficiaries." Sarah stared at the binder. "Does Beatrice know about this?" "No," James said. "Beatrice thinks she won. She thinks the game is over. She doesn't know that the game doesn't even start until you are removed from the house." He tapped the red binder. "Arthur gave me strict instructions. I was to wait until you came to me. If you never came, if you had just taken a payout and left quietly, this binder was to be burned. Arthur wanted to know if you would fight. He wanted to know if you had the spine to stand up to them." "I don't feel like I have a spine right now," Sarah admitted, her voice trembling. "I feel like I'm falling apart." "You drove here," James countered. "You didn't go to the Motel 6. That is spine enough." James opened the binder. The first page was a handwritten letter on Arthur's personal stationery. "My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, my heart breaks, for it means my family has failed you. I have watched you for 7 years. I have watched you nurse me, organize my life, and try to bring warmth to a house built on ice. You were the daughter I never had. Beatrice and Richard value things. You value people. They think power comes from money. You know power comes from character. In this binder, you will find the keys to the kingdom. But be warned, using them will start a war. Beatrice will not go down without a fight. She will slander you. She will try to destroy you. Are you ready?" Sarah read the words, Arthur's shaky handwriting bringing tears to her eyes. She remembered him in his wheelchair, looking out the window, telling her stories about how he built his empire from a single hardware store. He had been a tough man, but a fair one. "What do I have to do?" Sarah asked, looking up at James. "Tomorrow represents a significant date," James said. "It is the 6-month anniversary of Arthur's passing. Beatrice has organized a memorial dinner. The entire board of directors of Sterling Industries will be there. The senator will be there. Tiffany will be there." "They're going to announce the engagement," Sarah realized, a sick feeling in her gut. "At Arthur's memorial." "Precisely," James said. "It is the height of disrespect. Arthur knew they would do something like this. He instructed that the second reading of the will happen at a time of maximum impact." James slid a single key across the table. It was heavy, old-fashioned iron. "This is for the guest cottage on my property in the back," James said. "It's not luxury, but it's clean. You will stay there tonight. Tomorrow we go shopping. You cannot walk into that lion's den looking like a victim." "We're going to the dinner?" Sarah asked, her pulse racing. "No," James stood up, his eyes twinkling with a dangerous light. "We are not just going to the dinner, Sarah. We are going to hijack it. According to the codicil, the executor of the estate changes the moment the divorce papers are filed." "Who becomes the executor?" Sarah asked. James pointed a bony finger at her. "You do." The next morning, Sarah woke up in the small guest cottage. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then, the sunlight hitting the unfamiliar floral curtains brought it all back. The divorce, the eviction, the red binder. She sat up. The despair from the night before was still there, lurking at the edges of her mind. But it was being pushed back by a new feeling. Adrenaline. She showered and dressed in the cleanest clothes she had, a pair of jeans and a black turtleneck. She walked up to the main house where James was already waiting with coffee and a credit card. "This card is issued to the Arthur Sterling Private Trust," James said. "It has no limit. Beatrice has no access to it. We have 4 hours before the salon appointments I made for you." "James, I can't spend Arthur's money," Sarah protested. "It's not spending," James corrected. "It's investing in war paint. Beatrice attacks appearances. If you walk in there looking defeated, you lose the room before you open your mouth. You need to look like the CEO you are about to become." The CEO. The words echoed in her head. They spent the afternoon transforming Sarah. It wasn't about vanity. It was about armor. A tailored crimson dress that fit like a second skin. Sharp, professional, yet aggressive. It was a color Beatrice would never wear. Beatrice only wore black, white, or navy. Crimson was a declaration of war. Her hair, usually pulled back in a messy bun, was blown out into sleek, shining waves. The makeup artist hid the dark circles under her eyes and highlighted her cheekbones. When Sarah looked in the mirror, she didn't see the crying girl from the Honda Civic. She saw a woman who looked dangerous. "Ready?" James asked, checking his pocket watch. He was wearing his best 3-piece suit. "I'm terrified," Sarah admitted. "Good," James said. "Fear keeps you sharp. Let's go." The Sterling estate was glowing with lights. Luxury cars lined the driveway. Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, Ferraris. The memorial dinner was in full swing in the grand ballroom. Sarah and James arrived in a hired town car. The valet, a young man who knew Sarah well, dropped his jaw when he saw her step out. "Mrs. Sterling?" he stammered. I was told you weren't on the list. Mr. Sterling said you were indisposed." "I'm feeling much better, thank you, Timothy," Sarah said, her voice cool and steady. She handed him the keys. "Keep it close." She took James's arm. They walked up the massive stone steps. The security at the door hesitated. They had their orders. Sarah is persona non grata. But James Henderson stepped forward. "I am the family attorney, and I am here on official estate business. Interfering with the execution of a legal will is a felony. Do you want to be an accessory tonight, gentlemen?" The guards exchanged a look. They stepped aside. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of tuxedos and gowns. Soft jazz played. Waiters circulated with champagne. At the front of the room, on a small stage, Rick was holding a microphone. Beatrice stood beside him, beaming, her hand resting possessively on Tiffany Sinclair's arm. Tiffany was wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously bridal. "My father," Rick was saying, feigning emotion, "was a man of family. He wanted the Sterling name to continue with strength, and that is why, on this night of remembrance, I am also looking to the future. I am thrilled to announce—" The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom slammed open. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The music stopped. Every head in the room turned. Sarah stood there in her crimson dress, framed by the doorway, with James Henderson a step behind her, clutching the red binder to his chest. Beatrice's glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Rick froze, the microphone drooping in his hand. Tiffany looked confused, scanning the room to see what everyone was staring at. Sarah began to walk. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. She didn't look at the guests. She kept her eyes locked on Rick. The click-clack of her heels on the marble floor was the only sound in the room. She reached the stage and climbed the stairs. She walked right up to Rick, who looked as if he had seen a ghost. "Sarah," Rick hissed, his mic still live, broadcasting his panic to the whole room. "What the hell are you doing here? You're trespassing." Sarah reached out and plucked the microphone from his hand. "I'm not trespassing, Richard," she said, her voice amplified, clear and strong. She turned to face the crowd, spotting the board of directors in the front row. "I am here to fulfill Arthur Sterling's final wish," she announced. Beatrice lunged forward. "Cut the mic. Security, get this trash out of here. If anyone touches her," James Henderson's voice boomed from the floor, "they will be sued for assault. I am initiating the protocol of the Red Binder." A murmur of shock went through the older board members. They knew the rumors of the Red Binder. They thought it was a myth. "Protocol," Beatrice screeched. "Arthur is dead. I run this family." Sarah turned to Beatrice. She was close enough to smell the older woman's expensive perfume and the fear beneath it. "Not anymore, Beatrice," Sarah said. She held out her hand, and James stepped up, placing the red binder in it. Sarah opened the binder to the marked page. She looked at the crowd. "6 months ago, a will was read," Sarah began, "but that will had a condition that was broken yesterday when my husband, Richard, filed for divorce and evicted me from my home." She looked at Tiffany, who was shrinking back. "Arthur Sterling knew that without me, this family would descend into greed and chaos," Sarah read from the preamble. "Therefore, effective immediately, all assets previously held by Richard and Beatrice Sterling are frozen." "Lies!" Rick shouted, his face red. "She's lying!" "The new executor of the Sterling estate," Sarah continued, her voice rising over his, "is Sarah Miller Sterling. And my first act as executor is to demand an immediate forensic audit of the company finances." She slammed the binder shut. "And believe me," she said, looking straight into Beatrice's terrified eyes, "we are going to find everything." The morning after the memorial gala, the atmosphere at Sterling Industries was apocalyptic. The usually bustling headquarters in Stamford was hushed, employees whispering in huddled groups near the water coolers. The news had broken. The Sterling Empire was under siege, and the invader was inside the building. Sarah walked through the glass revolving doors at 8 a.m. sharp. She wasn't wearing the crimson dress anymore. Today, she wore a slate-grey power suit that screamed business. Flanking her were James Henderson and a team of 4 forensic accountants from a top-tier external firm, people who had no loyalty to Beatrice or Rick. They bypassed the reception desk. The security guard, a man named Miller who had worked there for 20 years, tipped his cap to Sarah. He had heard the stories. He knew who the real boss was now. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling," he said. "Good morning, Miller. Please ensure no one leaves the building with any boxes or files," Sarah said calmly. "You got it." Sarah marched straight to the elevators and hit the button for the 40th floor, the executive suite. When the doors opened, they found Rick pacing in the lobby, looking disheveled. He clearly hadn't slept. Beatrice was sitting on a leather sofa, barking orders into a cell phone. "You can't do this, Sarah!" Rick shouted as soon as he saw her. "Security is on their way." "Security let me in, Rick," Sarah said, walking past him toward the CEO's office. His office. "And according to the injunction filed at 9 a.m. this morning by Mr. Henderson, you are suspended pending the audit results. Hand over your badge. I am the CEO." "No." Rick spat. "My mother is the chairwoman." "Not as of this morning," James Henderson interjected, holding up a court order. "Judge Harrison, an old friend of Arthur's, I might add, found the terms of the codicil quite compelling. You are both suspended. If you attempt to access company servers, you will be held in contempt of court." Beatrice hung up her phone and stood up. She smoothed her skirt, her face a mask of icy rage. "You think you can just waltz in here and take my husband's company? I built this place alongside him." "No, Beatrice," Sarah said, stopping at the door of the CEO's office. "You spent the money he made. Arthur built this, and you've been draining it." Sarah turned to a team of accountants. "Start with the charitable trust accounts. Specifically, The ones linked to the Cayman Islands shell corporations I found listed in the red binder. Beatrice's face went white. It was the first time Sarah had ever seen genuine fear in the woman's eyes. You don't know what you're looking for," Beatrice stammered. "The red binder has account numbers, Beatrice," Sarah said softly. Arthur knew. He knew about the skimming. He knew about the fake construction contracts. He just didn't have the heart to send his own wife and son to prison while he was alive. But he left me the gun to do it. Sarah entered the CEO's office and closed the door, leaving Rick and Beatrice standing in the hallway. She sat in the massive leather chair that had once belonged to Arthur. It smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco. "Okay," she whispered to the empty room. "Let's see what they've been hiding." The audit took 2 weeks. It was a bloodbath. Every day, the accountants uncovered more rot. Rick hadn't just been incompetent. He was a thief. He had been funneling company money to fund his gambling debts in Vegas and Atlantic City, debts that ran into the millions. He had listed them as consulting fees to a firm that didn't exist. Beatrice's crimes were more calculated. She had been siphoning money from the employee pension fund to maintain the Sterling estate's upkeep and her lavish lifestyle. The renovations, the parties, the jewelry, it was all paid for by stealing the retirement savings of the people who worked for them. But the biggest twist came on a rainy Tuesday. Sarah was reviewing a file marked Project Zenith when she found a series of payments made to a private nursing firm, the firm that had supplied Arthur's night nurses in his final months. The payments were triple the standard rate, and they were authorized by Beatrice. Sarah called James immediately. "James, look at this. Why was Beatrice paying the nurses a bonus off the books?" James adjusted his glasses, reading the file. His face darkened. "Sarah, look at the dates. These bonuses were paid every time Arthur had a bad spell, every time he became too disoriented to speak to his lawyers. She was drugging him," Sarah realized, her hand covering her mouth in horror. She wasn't just neglecting him. She was keeping him over-medicated so he couldn't change the primary will. "This isn't just embezzlement anymore," James said grimly. "This is elder abuse, maybe even attempted manslaughter." "We need to go to the police," Sarah said. "Not yet," James advised. "We need to nail the coffin shut. We have the financial proof. Now we need the social leverage. The hearing regarding the validity of the codicil is in 3 days. They are going to claim Arthur was insane when he wrote it. These payments prove why he might have appeared insane, because they were poisoning him." Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the Blue Orchard restaurant. 1 hour. Come alone. It's about Rick." Sarah looked at the number. She didn't recognize it, but she had a hunch. "I have to go," Sarah said. The Blue Orchard was the kind of place Beatrice would go to be seen. White tablecloths, $30 cocktails, and a clientele that smelled of old money. Sarah walked in, still wearing her office attire. Sitting in a secluded booth in the back was Tiffany Sinclair. The senator's daughter looked different. Her perfect hair was a little messy, and she was nervously shredding a cocktail napkin. She didn't look like the smug woman on the stage at the gala. She looked like a rat trying to escape a sinking ship. "Tiffany," Sarah said, sliding into the booth opposite her, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I want to cut a deal," Tiffany said bluntly. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Rick is broke, isn't he?" Tiffany asked, her eyes searching Sarah's face. "My father. The senator. He had his people look into the rumors. They say the assets are frozen. They say Rick might be facing criminal charges." "It's worse than that," Sarah said, leaning back. "Rick is going to be destitute, Tiffany, and likely in prison for fraud. And Beatrice, she's going down with him." Tiffany took a large gulp of her martini. "I'm pregnant." Sarah froze. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "You're—" "What?" "I'm pregnant," Tiffany repeated, tears welling up. With Rick's baby. That's why we were rushing the engagement. My father is furious. He cares about his poll numbers. A scandal like this, marrying a broke felon, it would destroy his campaign. Why are you telling me this? Sarah asked, feeling a strange mix of anger and pity. She had wanted a baby with Rick for years. Hearing that his mistress was carrying his child felt like a knife to the gut. Because I have something you need, Tiffany said. She reached into a designer bag and pulled out a flash drive. What is that? Rick talks in his sleep, Tiffany said. And when he's drunk, he talks even more. A few weeks ago, he was bragging about how they handled Arthur. He laughed about it. He said they gaslit the old man into the grave. Tiffany pushed the drive across the table. I recorded him one night. I did it as insurance, in case he tried to leave me. He admits to knowing about the over-medication. He admits that Beatrice forged Arthur's signature on the transfer of the deed to the Hamptons house. Sarah stared at the small silver drive. This is the nail in the coffin. Take it, Tiffany said. Destroy him. Destroy Beatrice. Just leave me out of it. I'm going to go to Europe for a study abroad year. I'm going to handle this pregnancy quietly. I don't want the Sterling name anywhere near my child. Sarah picked up the drive. You realize this child is Arthur's grandchild? An heir. I don't care about the money anymore, Tiffany whispered. I've seen how that family eats its own. I don't want my baby to be a Sterling. Tiffany stood up, threw $100 bill on the table for her drink, and walked out. Sarah sat there for a long time, clutching the drive. She had the evidence to put her husband in jail. She had the evidence to destroy the family that had treated her like garbage. But as she walked out of the restaurant, she ran into Rick. He was waiting by her car, looking frantic. "Sarah!" he shouted. He looked like a wreck, unshaven, wearing the same clothes as yesterday. "Get away from me, Rick," Sarah said, unlocking her door. "Please," he begged, grabbing her arm. "You have to stop the audit. Mother is... she's losing it. She's talking about selling the estate. Sarah, we can work this out. I can leave Tiffany. It was a mistake. She means nothing to me." Sarah looked at him with pure disgust. "She's pregnant with your child, Rick." Rick's face went slack. She told you." "She did," Sarah said. "And you know what? She doesn't want you. She doesn't want your money. She just wants to get away from you. Just like I do. I did this for us." Rick yelled, desperation making him manic. "I needed the money to make you happy. You always wanted things." "I wanted a husband," Sarah screamed back, startling a passing couple. "I wanted a partner. I drove a Honda Civic for 7 years, Rick. I didn't care about the money. You did. You and your mother." She got into the car and rolled down the window. "Save your tears for the judge, Rick. You're going to need them." The majestic mahogany doors of the Superior Court opened, and the gallery was packed. The Sterling case had become national news. The headlines were sensational. "Socialite scorned takes revenge. The butler did it." No, the wife did. Sarah sat at the plaintiff's table with James Henderson. On the other side sat Beatrice and Rick, flanked by a team of 5 expensive lawyers from New York City. Beatrice looked frail, playing the part of the grieving, confused widow. Rick just looked angry. The judge, the Honorable Eleanor Harrison, banged her gavel. "We are here to determine the validity of the codicil to the last will and testament of Arthur Sterling," Judge Harrison said. "The defense claims that Arthur Sterling was of unsound mind when this codicil was drafted, and that he was unduly influenced by Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Sarah Sterling." Beatrice's lead lawyer, a shark named Marcus Thorne, ironic, Sarah thought, given her distaste for the name, stood up. "Your Honor," Thorne boomed, "Arthur Sterling was a man in the grip of dementia. We have medical records showing his decline. This red binder is a fabrication created by a disgruntled ex-wife and a lawyer who was losing his grasp on the firm. They manipulated a dying man to steal a legacy." He spent 2 hours tearing Sarah apart. He painted her as a gold digger. He brought up her background as a waitress. He claimed she had isolated Arthur from his family to brainwash him. Sarah sat stoically. She knew the truth. When it was James Henderson's turn, he didn't give a speech. He simply stood up and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, regarding the mental state of Arthur Sterling, we would like to submit Exhibit C, a video recording made by Arthur Sterling himself, dated 3 days before his death, witnessed by myself and Dr. Eris Thorne, no relation to the defense counsel, who certified his clarity of mind at the time of recording." Beatrice gasped. She didn't know about a video. The courtroom darkened. A large screen descended. The video flickered to life. It showed Arthur Sterling sitting in his library. He looked sick, his skin grey, but his eyes were bright and focused. He looked directly into the camera. "Hello, Beatrice. Hello, Richard," the video Arthur said. His voice was raspy but firm. In the courtroom, Beatrice put a hand to her throat. "If you are watching this," Arthur continued, "it means you have done exactly what I feared. You have cast Sarah aside. You have chosen greed over family." Arthur leaned forward in the video. "I am not insane. I am heartbroken. I know about the pills, Beatrice. I know you've been upping my dosage to keep me docile. I spit them out in the potted plant by the window when you leave the room." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Beatrice froze. "And Richard," Arthur said, looking at the lens with profound disappointment. "I know about the gambling. I know you stole from the Children's Charity Fund. I covered for you once. I won't do it again." Arthur paused, tears welling in his eyes on screen. "Sarah is the only one who loved me for me, not for the checkbook. Therefore, she is the only one fit to lead. I hereby revoke all previous wills. I leave 100% of the Sterling assets, both liquid and property, to Sarah Miller Sterling, to be distributed or held at her sole discretion. To my wife and son, I leave my forgiveness. You will need it, because you will have nothing else." The screen went black. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Then James Henderson spoke up. "We also submit into evidence a flash drive provided by Miss Tiffany Sinclair and the forensic audit tracking the embezzlement of $45 million by Richard and Beatrice Sterling." Judge Harrison looked at the defense table. Beatrice was shaking. Rick had his head in his hands. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said icily, "do you have a rebuttal?" Thorne looked at his clients, then closed his briefcase. "No, Your Honor." "Then I am ready to rule," Judge Harrison said. "The codicil is valid. The assets belong to Mrs. Sarah Sterling. Furthermore, I am forwarding the evidence of embezzlement and elder abuse to the district attorney's office immediately. Bailiffs, please ensure the defendants do not leave the building." The gavel banged. It sounded like a cannon shot. The eviction was scheduled for noon on Friday. It was a poetic justice that Sarah didn't enjoy as much as she thought she would. She stood at the gates of the Sterling estate, the same gate she had been kicked out of weeks ago. This time she wasn't in a Honda Civic. She was leaning against the hood of the black Jaguar Rick had told her she couldn't take. 2 police cruisers were parked in the driveway. A moving truck was idling. The front door opened. Beatrice Sterling walked out. She wasn't wearing her pearls. She was wearing a simple grey coat. She looked small, old. Rick followed her, carrying 2 boxes. That was all they were allowed to take. Personal effects only. No assets. They stopped when they saw Sarah. Beatrice walked up to her. For a moment, Sarah thought the old woman would scream or slap her. Instead, Beatrice just looked at the house, the mansion she had ruled like a queen for 40 years. "You won," Beatrice croaked. "No," Sarah said. "We all lost. Arthur lost his life. You lost your family. Rick lost his child. There are no winners here, Beatrice." "What will you do with it?" Beatrice asked, gesturing to the estate. "I'm selling it," Sarah said. "I can't live here. Too many ghosts. The proceeds are going to reimburse the pension fund you stole from, and the rest is going to the animal shelter and the new Arthur Sterling wing at the city hospital." Rick looked up, his eyes red. "Sarah, Where are we supposed to go? Sarah looked at her ex-husband, the man she had once loved. I hear the Motel 6 off I-95 has vacancies, Sarah said, her voice devoid of malice, just stating a fact. I paid for 3 nights for you. After that, you're on your own. She reached into her purse and pulled out a single envelope. She handed it to Rick. What's this? Divorce papers, Sarah said. I signed them. You're free, Rick. The police officer stepped forward. Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling, we need to get going. The district attorney is expecting you for booking at 2 p.m. La. Rick dropped his head. Beatrice let out a sob. They walked to the police cruiser and got in the back. Sarah watched them drive away. She watched the iron gates close. She turned to James Henderson, who was standing beside her, holding a pipe he wasn't smoking. It's done, Sarah said. Not quite, James smiled. You still have a company to run. 1 year later. The morning sun didn't just hit the windows of the CEO's office at Sterling Industries. It flooded the room, turning the space into a prism of light and energy. This was no longer the dark, mahogany-panelled cave where Arthur Sterling had smoked his pipe in secret and where Rick Sterling had plotted his gambling debts. The heavy velvet curtains were gone, replaced by sheer automated blinds. The imposing fortress-like desk was replaced by a sleek, collaborative workspace made of reclaimed glass and steel. On the corner of that desk sat a copy of Forbes magazine. The cover featured a woman in a slate-grey power suit, her arms crossed, her gaze steady and unyielding. The headline was bold, embossed in gold foil, The Sterling Turnaround, How Sarah Miller Saved a Legacy from Ruin. Sarah picked up the magazine, running her thumb over the glossy paper. It still felt surreal. Just 12 months ago, she had been standing on the side of a highway in a beat-up Honda Civic, watching her life disappear in the rear-view mirror. Now, she was steering a billion-dollar ship. She set the magazine down and looked out at the bustling floor below. The glass walls of her office were soundproof, but she could see the energy. People were talking, collaborating. The fear that had permeated the hallways during Beatrice's reign, the fear of layoffs, of sudden rages, of impossible demands, was gone. In its place was a culture of transparency. Sarah had reinstated the pension fund within 6 months. She had personally apologized to the vendors Rick had stiffed. She had rebuilt the company brick by brick, not with fear, but with the one thing the Sterlings had always lacked: integrity. Her intercom buzzed. It was her assistant, a bright young man she had hired based on his ideas, not his pedigree. Miss Sterling? Mr. Henderson is on line 1. He says it's personal. Sarah's breath hitched slightly. James Henderson, now semi-retired, but serving as her chairman of the board, usually texted for business. A call on the personal line meant news from the old world. Put him through, David. Thank you. She picked up the receiver. James, is everything all right? Hello, Sarah. James's voice came through, warm, but laced with a somber gravity. It was the voice of a man who had seen too much history to be easily shaken, but who still felt the weight of it. I'm afraid I have some news. It's about Beatrice. Sarah turned her chair away from the window, facing the white emptiness of the wall. She hadn't seen Beatrice since the day the moving trucks idled in the driveway of the Greenwich estate. Tell me. She passed away last night, Sarah, James said quietly. It was in the early hours. The staff at the state care facility said it was peaceful. Her heart simply stopped. Sarah waited for the wave of triumph, or perhaps anger, to hit her. She expected to feel a surge of vindication. After all, this was the woman who had mocked her eating habits, who had treated her like a servant, who had drugged her own husband to maintain control. But the vindication didn't come. Instead, Sarah felt a hollow, aching pity. Was she alone? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. She was, James confirmed. Rick didn't make it in time, and frankly, she had alienated everyone else who might have sat by her bedside. She died as she lived, Sarah. Proud, stubborn, and ultimately isolated. Sarah closed her eyes, picturing the formidable Beatrice Sterling lying in a generic hospital bed, stripped of her pearls, her mansion, and her power. It was a tragedy, not of circumstance, but of character. "Handle the arrangements, James," Sarah said. "A private service, no press, and pay for everything from my personal account. I don't want the state burying her. She was still Arthur's wife." "You're far kinder than she ever deserved," James noted, the admiration evident in his tone. "It's not for her," Sarah replied. "It's for Arthur. He loved her once." There was a pause on the line, the static filling the silence between them. "Speaking of Rick," Sarah asked, shifting the subject to the other ghost of her past. "Did he get the news?" "I called him this morning," James said. "He's taking a bus up from Ohio for the funeral." "Is he still at the dealership?" "He is," James chuckled dryly. "The reports are interesting. He's working at a used car lot outside of Cincinnati, Big Al's Auto Emporium. He's a salesman, and apparently not a very good one. He's learning the value of $1 the hard way. Standing out in the snow, haggling over sedans." Sarah tried to picture Rick, the man who used to wear $5,000 Italian suits and complain if his steak was slightly overcooked, scraping ice off a windshield in a cheap polyester jacket. "He's sending the checks, though," James added. "Every month. $300 here, $400 there. Restitution. It will take him 3 lifetimes to pay back what he stole, but he hasn't missed a payment." "Good," Sarah said. "Let him come to the funeral, but keep him away from the press. And James, make sure he has a decent hotel room while he's here. Don't put him at the Motel 6. James laughed softly. "You have a wicked sense of irony, Sarah. I'll handle it." "There is one more thing," James said, his voice softening. "A package arrived at my office this morning. It's from Europe, from Tiffany Sinclair." Sarah stiffened. Tiffany. The woman who had been the catalyst for the entire collapse. The woman who had carried the Sterling heir while Sarah was being evicted. What does she want? "She doesn't want anything," James said. "She sent a photograph and a letter." "She had the baby, Sarah, a healthy boy." Sarah gripped the phone cord. "What did she name him?" "Arthur," James said. "She named him Arthur." The tears finally came then, hot and fast. Arthur. A little boy, somewhere in France or Italy, carrying the name of the man who had started it all. A new Arthur Sterling, innocent of the crimes of his father and grandmother. She wrote that she wants him to know where he came from. Eventually, James continued. But she refuses to ask for a dime of Sterling money. She's working as a translator. She's doing it on her own. Sarah wiped her eyes, looking at the city skyline blurring through her tears. She thought about the vast fortune sitting in the Sterling Trust, money that Rick had tried to steal, money that Beatrice had hoarded, money that, by all rights, belonged to her now. "Set up the trust, James," Sarah commanded, her voice steadying. "The education fund we discussed. Full tuition to any university he chooses, and a stipend for living expenses. But keep it anonymous. Let Tiffany think it's a grant or a scholarship. I don't want her to feel beholden to us. But I won't let Arthur's grandson grow up struggling." "You're breaking the cycle," James observed. "Beatrice would have sued for custody or cut them off entirely. You're building a bridge." "Beatrice built walls," Sarah said. "Look where it got her." "I'm proud of you, Sarah," James said. "The old man would be too. You didn't just save his company. You saved his name." "I'll see you at the funeral, James." Sarah hung up the phone. The office was quiet again. She stood up and walked over to the coat rack. She grabbed her trench coat and her bag. She walked to the private elevator, but instead of heading to the garage where the company limousine waited, she pressed the button for the main lobby. She wanted to walk. She wanted to feel the cold air on her face. As she stepped out onto the busy sidewalk, the noise of the city washed over her. Horns honking, people talking, the rhythm of life moving forward. She buttoned her coat and reached up to touch the necklace at her throat. It was the diamond solitaire Rick had ripped from her neck that terrible night at the dinner table. She had bought it back at the estate auction, outbidding a jewelry collector from Dubai. She didn't wear it because she missed Rick. She wore it as a reminder. It was a trophy of war. It was proof that she had walked through the fire and hadn't turned to ash. She had turned to steel. She walked towards the parking garage where her Honda Civic was parked next to the luxury sedans of her board members. She smiled at the absurdity of it. She could buy a fleet of Ferraris if she wanted to. But she liked the Honda. It was the car that had carried her to safety when she had nothing. It was the only thing that had been truly hers. Sarah Miller Sterling unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the scared victim from the rebellious phase. She wasn't the scorned wife. She was the CEO. She was the executor. And for the first time in her life, she was entirely, completely free. She turned the key, the engine hummed to life, and she pulled out into traffic, ready to see what the future held. The wolves were gone, the shepherd was at rest, and the legacy was finally in safe hands. And that is how Sarah Miller took down the Sterling dynasty, not with a weapon, but with the truth. She proved that while money can buy power, it cannot buy loyalty. Rick and Beatrice lost everything because they underestimated the one person who actually cared about them. What do you think? Did Sarah go too far, or was her revenge perfectly justified? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. We post new dramas every week. Thanks for watching. And remember, be careful who you step on today. They might be the ones signing your checks tomorrow.